Current time is now 7:26 p.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. It's time for our last segment of the day, Made in Korea, with Professor John DeMoya from Seoul National University, who joins us this evening. Professor DeMoya, hello to you.
Hi.
We're going to go into a very, it is a significant moment in Korea's history. And I think there were a number of times, I think in the past we talked about so much conflict between the two Koreas. Mm-hmm. We sometimes forget that there were times when we thought we were very close to achieving peace.
Yes, and this was one of the more optimistic ones, certainly for the first decade of this millennium.
Yeah, and I think also what followed up to this particular event is also one of the more controversial.
Yes, as we will talk.
Yes.
Obviously, there are radically different interpretations about its aftermath because of the payments that were involved.
That's right. Well, we talked about, Vladimir Putin visiting North Korea for the first time in 24 years. This was...
Sure.
I believe it was July of 2000.
Oh, right. Previous, yes.
Yeah, and
yes.
So I was saying that, at that time when Putin was going, it was kind of a different situation where
very much so.
He just came into power, and also that there was sort of this peaceful atmosphere on the Korean Peninsula.
Yeah.
Putin would not have to kind of look around and go, am I going to get scrutinized for going to North Korea or anything like that?
Right. It certainly wasn't what has been in this past several days.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's because in June of 2000, then President Kim Dae-jung visited North Korea.
Yes, the 13th through the 15th. Yeah.
Exactly. And on the 15th, we call it the 615 is a Yugiro, right?
Right.
But the June 15th declaration.
Yes.
Which, for us, following the 2000 Inter-Korea Summit, were hopes of prospects of peace on the Korean Peninsula, but it also followed with a very controversial sunshine policy. Mm-hmm. I'm sure some of our listeners might have heard about the sunshine policy. Let's first and foremost...
Sure.
Before we get into this, what factors shaped the Kim Dae-jung presidency from 1997 to 2000 from the start?
Yeah, he comes in, as you know, following Kim Young-sam. He has a longer history previously of running back in the 70s, and then obviously immense personal conflict with Park Chung-hee.
Yes.
So he is, in many ways, finally coming into office, democratically elected, the perennial outsider getting into office. But most importantly, what everyone talks about, the Asian financial crisis breaks out just before and is in fact a factor in the election. So almost immediately, whatever ambitions he has are going to be shaped by rebuilding the economy and dealing with IMF. And so I imagine that part of what he wants to do with North Korea is use that as his legacy, along with restoring the economy as much as he can. And certainly the economy Korea does, and he gets a lot of the credit for that. But I imagine that North Korea is part of that too, seeing that he and his particular brand of politics has a unique opportunity to seek a different kind of relationship.
So when we talk about some of the more liberal presidents in Korea's history, two names always pop up. It's always Kim Dae-jung and the president that followed up, former president, late Roh Moo-hyun.
Yes, exactly. And he in many ways continues the legacy. Yeah.
And then when former President Moon Jae-in had the summit talks in 2018 with Kim Jong-un, there was a lot of sort of people comparing to the June 2000 summit.
Yeah,
Kim Dae-jung,
it's following
the spirit. And you see the DP lawmakers always mention the spirit of Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun.
And it's funny that you say that because, again, in doing a little reading for this presentation tonight, I saw that, as you just said, echoes between 2000 and 2018, where as opposed to the sunshine policy, some commentators referred to it as the moonshine policy.
Oh, yeah. Well,
but I mean, it's a joke. But so there are those echoes, but with the moon spin on it.
Yeah. But the moonshine does terrible things to you.
I recognize that it wasn't always used positively, whoever was making these commentaries.
Right, yes. Exactly.
But I like the reference.
I wonder, because over in the United States, another president by the name of Bill Clinton,
mm-hmm.
He had his share of controversies, but he was also a very popular. I like to say that he was a very popular president too. But what was then U.S. President Bill Clinton's attitude towards Korean diplomacy?
I think certainly everything I've read indicates that he certainly supported the idea of achieving a more peaceful relationship. And the context for this is, of course, is the 1994 crisis. The U.S. actually had on the books plans for if we have to do something. Fortunately, this did not happen. There was a summit planned, but Kim Il-sung passed away that summer.
Right.
But that after that, and with the U.S. itself achieving a closer relationship with North Korea, my understanding is that for the rest of his administration, he basically supported South Korean efforts to do this. And having seen what happened or almost happened in '94, he did not want to approach that kind of level of tension again.
Now, let's delve into... remember, Kim Dae-jung is also a Nobel Peace Prize recipient.
Yes, which comes from this, which is why it's both interesting but also a little bit controversial.
Yeah, exactly, because now we're going to go into the Sunshine Policy here. For our listeners out there who might not have the Sunshine Policy, which, by the way, still gets mentioned right now. What was the Sunshine Policy?
Sure. In basic terms, it is, as you can guess, the metaphor of the sunshine, a bit of warmth. It is not a soft policy towards North Korea at all. It's obviously maintaining strength, but it's saying that, at least in talking to them, offer them some softer version rather than the sort of the hammer and the fist. And to give you, I did not know this, again, until reading this. Apparently, Kim Dae-jung gave a speech, and he took this from Aesop. And apparently it's a fable where the wind and the sun were arguing about who is stronger, and they used a traveler, and the wind, of course, blew, and the traveler tightened his coat, and the sunshine softly warmed the traveler who removed his coat. So the idea being that with that kind of warmth, North Korea could feel more comfortable, maybe take off its jacket, and not come completely over, but certainly be a more engaging partner and be more willing to listen. In other words, strength has not worked up until now. Let's try something a little more technological cooperation, economic cooperation, and let's see if this can work.
So, again, we're going to go into how the Sunshine Policy does still get mentioned nowadays and why it becomes such a controversial policy. But at the time, how was this new policy regarded within South Korea, though?
I would imagine conservatives didn't like it, but certainly given the fact that Kim Dae-jung is the president and at the time of the summit, I think at that time probably very positively. It is later, after, when it doesn't achieve the kind of results that he had hoped, that you'll get some of the criticisms becoming stronger.
Oh, by the way, with the Sunshine Policy, you're talking about massive financial support being handed over to...
Both then and then also as you move into the Roh Moo-hyun administration later and things like Kaesong, if you consider that to be part of it, then yes, you're talking millions of dollars over a period of, 7, 8, 10 years?
And so at the time, I remember, because again, I was in the United States when this was all happening, and it was such a big deal. And, New York, where I'm from, a big Korean community, everyone's talking about this. And, we got Korean newspapers there as well. And the consensus amongst, I remember, the Korean American community in New York was, number one, because, we all know that North Koreans, the people were starving. And
yes, this is coming off of the period of famine.
Oh, absolutely.
I keep forgetting that, yes.
And so that this, because although there is this controversy that there is a lot of money being given to North Korea, they're saying, well, this is going to help the starving people.
Okay.
And so, because even within the South Koreans, there was this whole idea. I know there is this, there is a still ongoing war with North Korea, and we might not agree with the North Korean regime, which still holds true right now. We still do believe that the North Korean people deserve to be.
We recognize a common kinship, that in this situation of dire need, we need to reach out.
So it was positive. It was very positive.
Yes, that would be my basic take.
However,
yes.
Many say that it was a failed policy now that we look at it.
Sure.
Because they're saying that, that money that was funded into North Korea, was that really used to help the North Korean people?
Yeah, and of course, if I can elaborate on that really quickly, the figure that gets bandied about the most for the immediate context of the meeting is a figure of 500 million.
Yeah.
What the people who are giving the money, who will try to justify it, what it said is actually, it's funny, it's a little bit different from aid to the North Korean people, though I
Yeah.
get that. But because of the idea of economic cooperation and obviously later on Kaesong, the idea was that this was being given for the rights to open up electrical lines to. So in other words, kind of like you would do a large business sort of commerce package. Of course, South Korean opposition politicians saw this as, and have said openly, this was $500 million essentially to bring to the table. You essentially bought the summit.
Yeah.
And also, of course, later that accusation has gone so far as people have said that the Nobel Prize was essentially bought.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
what happened at the 2000 summit, though.
Perfect.
Because, again, this was a huge deal at
Yes.
this time, the Inter-Korean Summit.
Yeah, and I
2000.
remember the television coverage.
Yeah, and this was, again, between Kim Dae-jung and Kim Jong-il at the time. What points came out of the declaration, though?
Sure. The declaration is 8 points. It basically, as far as I can tell, if I can distill it a little bit, is very much emphasizing these points of cooperation, not necessarily Tongil reunification, but things like, and that did actually sometimes happen, restoring rail lines, possibly electrification, obviously things that lead to things like making South Korean products in a place that, I mean, not in that language, but that will come out later.
Yeah.
Kaesong. So very much cooperation, but hinting towards like, let's not just talk about cooperation like in spirit, but let's like actually lay down how we're going to materially cooperate. And I guess from the South Korean side, the idea would be that if the North Koreans got used to doing that, they might get used to the idea that like doing business with a capitalist partner who are brothers might not be such a bad thing. And then slowly you begin to lessen the economic divide and obviously then the cultural divide.
By the way, this whole idea here was also mentioned by a former president, Donald Trump. Remember when he was saying that if they're able to achieve peace, right, denuclearize, that there'll be some economic, prosperity. And he's like, I might even make a Trump Tower in North Korea. You know, like he's a businessman, right?
But I also think he probably didn't know that there was a president. He probably thought he was being original. Yeah,
he was going. This is such a genius thing.
But this idea actually, and on paper, it is not a terrible set of ideas.
It's not. It works.
Yeah, it's as you said. It's what gets conveyed on the other side, what possibilities there are of verification, all of those things we now know probably undermine the policy in all kinds of ways.
But going into this, because considering the tensions between the two Koreas.
Yeah, and particularly in 1994, again, when there were allegedly plans basically to, if the U.S. plans that are out there to believe, Clinton had a strike plan in place for to hit the North Korean nuke facilities.
Right, exactly.
Again, this did not happen, fortunately.
No, it didn't happen. It didn't happen.
But they were talking about it July 94.
So things are pretty bad. There must have been a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations for this Inter-Korean summit to happen in the first place. Do we know anything about this?
Again, this is where we get the money figure, and we can say at least that there were, again, sums of money were discussed in terms of setting up the summit. Again, once this came out later, retroactively, particularly I believe Hyundai was involved, again, they were saying it was about rights. But if you believe the conservative accounts of this, essentially they were saying that the behind-the-scenes negotiation was getting the North to the table, essentially a payment, a quid pro quo. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that's interesting, because I had forgotten this, again, you look at the television thing, you can see it too. They knew that they had an agreement, but they said as late as Kim Dae-jung getting on the plane and the short flight to Pyongyang, they didn't actually know if Kim Jong-un would like show up at the airport. Now he did. He showed up and actually on the tarmac. But they were like really not sure that he would. I don't think they feared that they would be met with guns or anything like that. But they thought that he might send a representative, that it might. And he clearly interpreted it the right way. Was that he showed up and made a very public display of greeting Kim Dae-jung right at the plane and kind of embracing him and. Yeah, but they did not know that was going to happen.
Yeah, it was.
So they were like, we've got this set up, let's fly and see what happens, but we don't know. So the behind the scenes was probably a lot of that too. Who's going to be your guy? Who's going to show up? So other things too, just a little kind of funny stuff. Apparently Korean media were allowed, Chinese media were allowed, but apparently CNN wanted to be there and they were not permitted.
Really?
And apparently, I guess, I'm assuming this was the North Koreans, but apparently they were like told like no foreign media. So like China, Korea, South Korea, North Korea, yes, but no,
Remember 1994? Still.
Yeah. I guess CNN was a little too capitalist for them.
No, it probably was.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the long-term implications of this very summit. We talked about the 2018 summit between Moon and Kim Jong-un.
Yep.
And I would have to say, I mean, it kind of started off with, what is it, that ice hockey diplomacy, let's just put it at that, with the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Right?
Yeah.
Two Korean women's hockey team coming together.
Yes, yeah.
And that kind of started everything. And sports diplomacy, we call it. And I'm a big fan of sports diplomacy.
And look at 72 China, the ping pong.
Ping pong diplomacy.
Precisely. There are precedents, and it has sometimes worked. Yeah,
absolutely. And so a lot of people were saying, okay, so this is very similar to the 2000 summit. However, there is no sort of, money that's being funneled into North Korea.
And then there certainly wasn't even the hope that the economic benefits would be
No.
I
don't think there was anything of that.
No.
And so because the big controversy is that the sunshine policy had not worked, right?
Right. As far as I understand, pretty much, at least publicly, is associated with the end of, as you said, Kim Dae-jung and No Min-hyun, and then when you have Lee Myung-bak come in, it's kind of like, I don't think he ever officially says it's closed, but it's clearly he's going to go another direction.
But then even in 2002, remember when we were talking about 2002, what happened, there was the Battle of Yeongpyeong.
Yes.
And this is only 2 years afterwards.
There were still clear tensions, yeah.
So you kind of wondered, even at that time, they were going, what about the $500 million that were being, And so a lot of conservatives will go, the sunshine policy should not work.
This was regularly used in the political divide in Korea as a point of discussion.
And so now this...
And still is.
Yeah, and so now there's still the whole idea, although there was no $500 million that were being sent into North Korea during the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit, they still call it sort of the sunshine policy in that you're trying to kind of ease the tensions by... not using force.
No, in this case, cultural diplomacy, but
and things like that. But again, the criticism is because we saw what happened after the Hanoi summit.
Yeah.
Because we were going, boy, once the Hanoi, because the Singapore summit was pretty optimistic.
Yeah. I was here. I remember how crazy it was. If I can say something that I think I'm allowed to say this publicly. It never happened, but we at the university received emails saying essentially, hypothetically, how would you feel in a couple of years about exchange students from
North Korea?
Yeah, and so they were at least clearly thinking on a policy level about we might have some exchange opportunities.
I remember
this, of course, again did not happen.
Yeah, and I remember on the morning that the Hanoi summit had taken place. This was the second summit.
Yeah.
A lot of people were going, guys, we might actually see an end of war. We might see peace on the Korean Peninsula.
I thought there might actually be a treaty, and then people not knowing what that would mean. But yeah, exactly. I thought it might actually be one of the first times that there might be at least a legal settlement and then an end to the war. And
I was like looking at things like, will my navigation system, my car work? Things like that. There was a lot of optimism. But again, we saw the fallout from the Hanoi summit. And then what shortly followed afterward is worsening of the Inter-Korean Summit.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And so they go back into the idea that the sunshine policy or the moonshine policy, as some had called it, did not work. And so this is the long-term kind of implication, and this often gets mentioned here. But let's also talk about Kim Dae-jung and the Nobel Peace Prize that he received.
I think this fits beautifully with much of what we've been talking about. Obviously, the positive and more liberal Koreans who see this see this as the culmination of career. I have never heard this personally, but again, reading some of the stuff for this week, heard that he is sometimes referred to because of this as the Nelson Mandela of Korea, which I think is a weird comparison, but nonetheless.
Well, also, Kim Dae-jung was also arrested and things like that.
Exactly. So that justifies it. But on the other side, the accusation that the Nobel Prize was unjustified because it was essentially bought with a summit that was using money that never really did anything materially. So I imagine that divide still exists. In other words, I don't think there is a simple answer. I think those two contradictory images have to go together depending on where you are in the Korean political divide.
You know what I was hearing is going back to Trump. There was some people that were saying that
I think I know where this is going.
Trump wanted a Nobel Peace Prize.
He hinted at it. Yes.
Yeah, he's wanted it.
He thought that he had accomplished something very substantive as opposed to getting a piece of paper with Kim Jong-un's signature on it.
I'm not going to lie. guy.
Yeah.
Not a big
I'm
fan.
impressed that he brought them to the table, but beyond that,
Because he started off by calling him Rocket Man.
I know.
I thought that was going to start a war. And I said,
know.
don't do that,
Well, I assume he meant in the Elton John kind of way. But
Did you hear what happened with
No,
the
go ahead.
Singapore summit? What the gift that Trump had apparently tried to give to Kim Jong-un?
Please tell me it wasn't a Bible or
No,
please,
it wasn't. And someone had to stop Trump from
Okay,
giving him
what was it?
Allegedly, it was the John Elton album Rocket Man.
I'm sorry, that's wonderful.
And they said, they said, Mr. President, you can't do this.
Okay.
We're trying to achieve peace right now.
My little thing I can't resist throwing in here too is I have a coffee cup from the summit because one of my former Singapore students who is PRC Chinese but a Singapore PR he has Korean and he has Chinese, so he's a journalist. He grabbed me a cup and people come to my office and they're like, why do you have a Trump Kim summit? And I'm like, because I have connections. So I still have friends in Singapore.
It's just a lot of what he did, I feel like, and what he said, again, going back into the economic benefits that North Korea could see, and all the lines and the communication lines, the rail lines,
and
the hotels.
More importantly, for the first couple of years, Kaesong did produce some things. I know I had definitely friends in the Korean business and science community who thought that this was a possible model for the future of, again, you instead of exporting a South Korean factory to Vietnam, why not put it in North Korea and let the economic yes, you control the culture, but why not let the economic benefits kind of slowly spill out so that if there's ever a future, you're not dealing with this gap, but you're dealing with a gap that's much closer. Yeah. I mean, again, I get the idea. It didn't work, but
it's now shuttered.
Yeah, precisely.
It's been closed for a really long time, and then you have the Inter-Korean Liaison Office that was, blown up, so they'll continue to say. I mean, and you see how things work out. I mean, even with the September 19 military agreement, right? It was technically that North Korea kind of, failed to abide by in the first place. And later on, I think South Korea was patient enough to wait, and then ultimately, recently, with the balloons carrying trash, they said, enough.
Yeah, this
was it, right? Like
this lately was the most funny thing, as you know. I was recently away, and when I was traveling, I had people ask me like, "You live in Korea? Is that real?" And I'm like, "Unfortunately, yes."
No, it is real.
Because it's so surreal that people don't believe it when they hear the news. Yeah,
this is going to be again. I mean, it was a wonderful moment back then.
I think that. No, I like that description.
Yeah, it was a wonderful moment. However, unfortunately, because we're just unable to come to an agreement with North Korea and trying to achieve peace, right? It's just it's often mentioned as why we can't go for a sunshine policy. And then now we are seeing, of course, a more hawkish stance. And you always...
that will probably be the case, at least in the immediate present.
Yeah, and that's always the thing, right? Conservative administration, you'll see a more hawkish stance. And then, you have a liberal stance administration, you'll see maybe some of the sunshine policy.
But they'll be careful not to call it the sunshine policy precisely because they know the connotations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Professor De Moya, as always, thank you very much for today's lessons. Have a safe one, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks very much.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.